Yeah, so we've got this fantastic rainbow chameleon that has a picture that I found that we're going to kind of base a doodle on tonight. And very fortunately, I've been given a pack of this sounds like product placement. It really isn't. So I'm not going to show you the. Well, you might see the make, but anyway, it really isn't. It was just a coincidence. It's that I'm working on a project with a mural design project with a school, and they all got materials bought for them. They wanted me to have the same one, so that when I'm doing tutorials with them, I've got the same pens as they've got, because I thought it was important, and I think it is important. So I've got this lovely set of fine lines in colour. So I think I'm going to work in colour tonight. So instead of using any sort of black lines, I'm going to do coloured lines. If you've got a black pen and you haven't got lots of colours, then don't worry, do a monochrome version, and you can always go in and add colour into his scales sort of at a later date, or do a second version, as I said, so we can follow it. Now I've been thinking about how to tackle this. So my first thought was, maybe we could do, draw him kind of like draw some bits in pencil first to kind of locate all the major areas. But I'm sort of wondering if, because of all he's got this incredible scale pattern all over him, we can kind of like maybe build him sort of from the eye outwards, almost like putting on little doodle building blocks and sort of creating him. So I'm going to give that a go and see how we get on with that. And at the end of the day, that's the wonderful thing about doodling. If it doesn't work, it's a complete disaster. Well, it's a doodle, so no one's going to be deeply upset if we just turn him into a huge page of doodle. So it's quite handy. So I'm just going to move in a bit to the paper, because we're going to start with his sort of eye section. So the first bit we're going to do is we're going to draw the eye, and then we're going to sort of build out from that. So obviously this is not a naturalistic picture, so you can choose any colour that you want to draw in. I might use some black if I want to get darker in some areas, but I'm going to start off with I think a sort of purple or a blue, because the eye is quite sort of a prominent feature, and I want to kind of make that sort of quite definite, so I know where it is. Then we're going to kind of build him outwards from there. So I'm going to start with his eye sort of, I suppose it's in the top. If you imagine your paper divided in half, so you've got a top half and a bottom half, and then divide the top half again, and he's sort of, so I suppose his eye's going to be at sort of the 2/3 up, 2/4, no, I'll get it right in a minute, 3/4 up from the bottom or a quarter down from the top kind of position. So first of all, if you break it down, you try and see it very simply the shape it is, the first thing we're going to get is this sort of classical eye shape. He's got his big sort of lid, and then it's sort of like a long pointy oval like that. That's kind of where he's starting from, almost like a lemon shape really, I suppose, isn't it? And then inside that we've got a circle kind of inside the lid. So I'm going to do a circle in there, and I'm going to leave a little bit of that bottom area, and then just bring that circle up to kind of start being the eyeball bit. And then he's got a lovely gold ring round his iris. So I'm going to, thinking about it, I'm going to swap to an orange, and I'm going to do an orange ring inside that eye, sort of round like that. So it's already getting some colour into it. And then I'm going to, I said I wasn't going to use black, and immediately I'm going to use some black, but I'm going to use some black just for the pupil in the middle because it is so dark. Now I know he doesn't have any sort of obvious highlights in his eye, but I'm going to do a circle inside that orange like that, just following it round. And I think I might put a little bit of highlight in, because it does always bring an eye to life. So what I do is draw a little circle inside that. So I've sort of defined my area. Let's come a little bit closer again with my... I might have to move my paper, because this camera it has a really weird focal length. So if you're not exactly in front of it, it tends to kind of defocus a bit. So let's move it there. So you can see I've drawn a circle inside that, and then I can fill in that black around that, but then the circle's left white, and that gives me a lovely highlight just to sort of make that eye come to life a bit. And because you always have to remember the eyes are very wet and shiny, and that just makes them different from the other sort of shape around. So we're probably going to come back and do some more on that, but that's kind of like starting his eye bit. And then if I look at the shapes that I've got, I think the next thing kind of like working around it is he's got a prominent sort of eyelid shape. So that's like doing another line that comes up and over the top and down again. So that's kind of like giving it an eye sort of underneath. And then there's like another shape that I'm almost seeing around that, sort of like another sort of elongated shape of eye. So I'm going to bring that round and round there and bring that up again. So it's like a sort of another kind of lemon shape inside that shape. I am simplifying him a bit because, because really I am. And then I'm going to we can do some scale patterns because there's a nice ridge of scales kind of coming up here. So I can see, I can just draw in some scale shapes. And because we're going to do a doodle chameleon, he's not going to stay with just plain scales. He's going to get quite fancy on his scale front. He's going to have some decorated, maybe some sort of flat floral patterns and things in his scales. So I'm going to bring that big scale up kind of round to there. And then I'm going to take this ridge and it's going to come under his eye and just sort of slightly come away from where that that shape that we've drawn is there. He's going to see a sort of trail of scales kind of coming down sort of into that bit there. So I've got this I've got his eye shape now and this kind of roll of sort of doodle sort of shapes coming round. Let's change to a different colour because we're going to do this a totally colourful chameleon. So I'm going to pick up a red pen and I'm going to put the sort of upper, this is going to be, now I can see I've got this area in dark. I can see he's got like a sort of eyebrow bit coming up here. So I can put this in and this becomes kind of the top of his head, kind of coming around there. Now, there's a nice scale pattern in here where the scales kind of spread out a bit and they become they sort of change shape quite a lot. So to get that to work, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some rays kind of coming out from this sort of section first, like sunbursts. And they're going to start off close-ish together. And then as they come around, they're going to kind of spread out a bit and, form like a sort of pattern basis that we can expand on. So it looks like he's got really glamorous eyelashes in a way, kind of here. And then once I've got those ones in, I want to come round and I'm going to draw some lines echoing that shape that I've got going round. So I'm going to come round and start where they're going to be quite close into that line. And then I'm going to echo the shape again, close-ish there, but then opening out a bit more on that edge like that. And coming up through there a bit more. And now I'm not going to leave that as just kind of squares. So what I'm going to do then is come in and draw in circles that fit inside those squares. And I think on some of my doodle tutorials we've done this technique before. And as you can see, if you then almost like treat the lines you've drawn as like a grid, like a guideline, if you then go in and soften them into circles, and they sort of, as long as you're kind of fitting your circle into the squares that you've drawn yourself, you can see how that's become sort of a guide and it's elongating those scale shapes. And we can go back later and colour in between those little triangles that you get left behind, the little white triangles, what we call negative space, the bit that you don't draw but turns up unexpectedly. We're going to colour that in to kind of give that more depth. And as we get all these scales in, the grid kind of feel is going to start to disappear, and you're going to see that a lot more as being scales of your chameleon. And I think it's quite a useful way of kind of planning this sort of doodles out and kind of getting them to work, and just so that you sort of know where you're going, so you're not having to literally build it one scale at a time. And we're going to do similar kind of thing in here to get some more ridges going on in his eye, because he's got quite sort of ridgy kind of tight eyes. And of course when we do circles like this, the bigger they are, the chance we are of doing some pattern work inside some of these shapes to kind of turn him from being a craggy old lizard into a very highly decorated lizard. Which makes him sound like a war hero now, but let's sort of bring these lines in and just softening off those squares so we've got circles. That's going to make them into a softer shape. It's going to make it look a lot more like scales. Right, so I'm just going to come in there, and then we've got, so look, we've got these sort of nice scales here to sort of blend into. Underneath his eye section, we've got some, that's quite dark in the picture, so we can do a similar kind of thing. I'm going to swap to a blue, I think, because that's quite a deep, shadowy kind of colour. And I'm going to build some little circles. I think I'm going to do some, again, the sort of lines around his eye and kind of coming up round like sort of shape. We're going to do the same sort of thing. We're going to go even smaller with these, so we're going to get that really intense kind of knobbly bobbly feel. And as well as doing that, because we're going to put very small shapes in here, that's going to give us shadowing, isn't it? It's going to, because it's my thing that I say boringly every week, just keep remembering that the closer you draw your lines, the more tone you're putting on, therefore the darker your image is going to look. So if you want to have plenty of shadow, we can put lots of lines close together. And can you see what I'm doing with these lines? I'm actually giving them a bump, so they're not a straight line. They're kind of like each little line, each one I'm doing between is a curved line, like a bracket, you know, or a rainbow kind of curve. But by doing that along, see, that's making that ridge look really bumpy and ridgy under his eye. And I keep saying under his eye, it sounds like The Handmaid's Tale. So I'll keep going through all these bumps through here. And again, if they spread out a bit, then those are going to get a bit further apart. So if you want to make them look darker, draw them closer together. And if you want to make them look a bit lighter, draw them further apart, and they leave more white paper. So around the top of his eyelid around here, I'm going to draw them quite close together. So that's going to start getting that a lot more shaded looking. So there we go. And because I've got the we've got the red section next, but remember I spoke about those little negative space triangles that we've got sort of going on in between those red scales. I'm going to come in and just with my blue pen just colour a bit of colour in between those red squares, or red circles, sorry, where we've got those little blue triangles. And that starts to darken those scales down a bit, and it's also going to make them look more bumpy, and it's going to bring the colour across from the blue section into the red section and give it a bit of shadow and a bit of form. And that's all going to help sort of making it look nice and craggy, because they are beautifully craggy. And it is quite amazing when if you've ever met one, Chameleon, that is, and I mean, not like, you know, hanging around, obviously in a zoo usually, there's not native, are they, to link to Britain, so they're unlikely to be knocking about on the streets, although I did once see one on an underground train. It was attached to a person. It was sitting on their shoulder on the underground, which I had never seen before, very happily just sitting there with its tail curled around the owner's sort of back, you know, just watching everybody and they have that thing where their eyes move in different directions, so it was sort of looking up and down the carriage at the same time. So if I want to make any of these little circles look darker, again, I can go in and draw around them again, because I'm making them double thick, or, you know, adding extra weight of lining, that's going to make them look darker and bumpier. Okay, so we'll come back later and we're going to do something spectacular to give him a really sort of lovely eye. So we've got this is sort of like the top of his brow bone. Then there's like another bit that sort of comes up here, isn't there? So let's change to a lighter blue. And I think we can do some of our kind of teardrop spirals kind of coming in here to sort of get that sort of shape in. So that's sort of the corner of his eye. So I'm going to do a kind of teardrop spiral shape coming out. So we're going to blend together some doodly patterns, and you can just keep looking across and sort of trying to think, right, okay, so I want to put roughly this sort of shape and do one kind of spiral doodle at a time and bring it down a bit. That's sort of going to be his nose section, and his nose is going to be somewhere around here. That's it. And then he's got this big sort of smiley, well, sort of quite smiley mouth. So that's a line that's going to come all the way back down under there and kind of down. So there we go. You can make him smiley, or you can make him, you know, growly, depending on the mood of your chameleon. And then I'm going to put some circular ones in between those spirals so that they've got, it sort of like gives it a stronger outline, but we can see that kind of face coming down here. And again, I can put some, what else have I got? Pens have I got? Oh, let's go for, I'm going to pick up my dark blue again, or maybe the purple actually. So when you're using colours, you start to realise you're holding about 5 in your hand each time, try and juggle them around. So I want to get some of this purple, so that these purple ones are going to blend into those spirals a bit more. So just like a little extra kind of bit of shadow under some of them. And let's get his nostril in sort of dark. They always have a sort of slightly, I don't know if it's sort of world weary, but kind of like, you know, they don't have very animated faces, I suppose, reptiles. So we read their expressions, I think, as being quite sort of jaded and sort of, you know, hard to impress. Like he's seen all this before kind of look. Right, so then I'm going to go along to do his lips in, because they're kind of like almost mirroring each other if you look at the shapes you've got going on. So I'm simplifying it down again because I'm not doing every single scale. So I'm going to put these sort of like almost like jelly tot shapes kind of coming along here. That's it, sort of his jelly tot. And we'll come back and we'll do some pattern work into these shapes. But giving them that flat bottom really helps to define that being his sort of mouth shape, because they've got that sort of quite firm lip kind of area. And then to begin with, I'm going to choose a different colour so that we can see where the line of his mouth comes. So I'm going to kind of repeat them underneath, but I'm going to slightly, I don't want to do them so they match up exactly. So I'm just going to do them so they're slightly different sizes, so that they're sort of, they come down and meet the line at a different point. And I think that helps just to make him look like he's got a mouth and that they're not all just sort of blending into one lump. So we've got these sort of shapes through here coming down there, and that gives us this nice sort of reptilian mouth. And then there's quite a big sort of, there's a smooth sort of section there which sort of comes under his chin, and then he's got his sort of frill bit which we're going to really go to town on. So what thing I want to get in is that they have this really big sort of like, I don't know what it is really, but it looks like a giant scale sort of down kind of here at the corner of their mouth, and it's probably got some sort of practical use, I imagine, not just for decoration. So I'm going to sort of draw that in so I know kind of where I'm heading. And if I look at the picture, it's sort of the middle of this sort of big scale is kind of in line with this end of his eye. So if you kind of come down a bit and then draw a great big sort of circular blobby kind of shape, that sort of comes round like that. And then I can see we've got all this lovely scale work here with sort of lines and things. And there's like another shape here, which I think is probably his ear. But what I'm going to do is, in the way that we did this grid kind of idea with the red lines, I'm going to do something similar that goes around here. So I've got, I'm going to put a curly shape in there, and that's kind of going to be his ear. And then I'm going to take lines coming round, going close together and then out again, kind of meeting up with some of these scales. So we're going to do this kind of twisting kind of grid form again, like coming round through there and through up to there, and then we're going to bring these lines up his jaw into those sort of scale patterns, and we use this sort of area here to kind of balance, or sort of like as a starting point to know where we're going to come up under, and then we can reach up and a little bit more up under his chin, sort of coming up. There we go. So like that's just that sort of section. This again is just our kind of outlining bit. We're going to do the rest later. So now we're going to come down, and I'm going to put a few lines kind of coming round. You can almost see this kind of like grid pattern again appearing on him, and they're really quite small here, so we're going to make these ones close-ish together, and they're kind of coming, you know, odds this way, and then we can wiggle them across and round, sort of coming up under his chin and under these sort of shapes through here. And there's all sorts of lovely shapes in there that we can sort of like draw more on a bit later. So let me just bring them sort of round here a bit. So let's get some nice spirals going on here, because I want to get some more patterns on him, because he is a doodle chameleon and not just a sort of regular chameleon. So once we've got this grid to follow, then we can get our teardrop shapes and we can fit them into one of those, sort of do a spiral and then bring them down, and then we can put some little circles kind of into that shape like that. So that's starting to get some really exciting sort of patterns going on. And so let's have a look. Let's do one the other side here. Bring that spiral round, fitting it inside each little box that we've kind of drawn, and filling in some little dots and things around. So any kind of spiral shape that you like doing, we can kind of like fit all these in, and we're starting to get this nice sort of pattern. We're going to do a frill down here as well, but we're going to just keep fitting. So obviously if I was doing like a naturalistic drawing, I'd be spending hours doing each little tiny individual scale, you know, and all of that sort of stuff. But we're going to sort of slightly pattern him up now, make him a bit more elegant with our kind of spirally. We've done these sort of feather doodles before, so it's kind of like getting these spirals in, or letting me sort of stack them into one of these scale shapes. But just like we've done before, where you're kind of like, as I've said, you sort of like isolate a little area for yourself, and then you can fill it in with patterns. So if you define this area, and then let's do a nice big spiral into there, and then each little one becomes a little tiny space that you've got to fill in, and you can sort of think about each pattern going into each piece, and you know they're kind of going in the right direction because you've got this grid kind of shape to hang it all on. So you think, well, by the time I've got them all in, they're all going to be going in the right direction, so I can focus in on getting some of these nice spirals fitted in and sort of working. And obviously what we're going to do is go back and some of these are going to colour in between in these negative spaces again to make this surface on our, I mean, he really is a karma chameleon, isn't he, if you remember the song, to make him really vibrant and give him lots and lots of texture. So I'm just putting some circles in round here. I think this big area here, I think we're going to have to put something nice and flowery onto that, but we'll come round to that in a bit. So let's just put some more spirals in. And you can change colours as well. I haven't changed colours, but perhaps I should now that I've said that. So I'm going to do one more orange square kind of in here, and then or one more lot of orange twisty spirals, and then I think I'm going to swap to a red pen, and I can put some red coloured, sorry, not ready, because that sounds like I mean already prepared, some red spiral shapes into this section, and that's also going to give me a little bit more shadow kind of feel because I'm using a slightly darker colour. So let's put all these sort of spirals in, lots of very elegant curlicues. Pop those in sort of into there, and some more red coming up under here, just those nice, if you just want to do like a long elongated spiral kind of tucking under its chin, and then you can do a little bit coming down, and if there's a weird space then you can always fit a little circle into it, and it just kind of works really nicely to kind of give that overall kind of effect. And I think the size that I'm drawing, it's going to end up being like a sort of head and shoulders portrait really of this doodle chameleon, but that's fine. And we can do, you know, you can always do more to add some bits in. So where I've got this sort of dark or darker kind of red feel going on, we're going to add some shade around that, and same with the orange. So I think when I get to this side, I think I'm going to move into some green on this side, just because I could do pink. I think I'll do some pink up around here as well, but I'm going to put a sort of more yellowy green into this bit here. I hope you can see it all right, and it's not too faint on the camera, but we're going to bring it in and we're going to colour in around it again. And as we saw before, as you colour in between in the negative spaces, the kind of grid effect that we've got going on will disappear and it'll become less obvious. So you'll start to see more of the kind of patterns that are going on in Mr. Chameleon. So here, where I've got quite square shapes to work inside, I'm really just doing sort of like snail shell spirals because they fit almost like doing a circle, but they're just a little bit more interesting just to put those in. So I'm keeping the elongated shapes for the longer, kind of more spread out boxes. And then the longer ones, I can still put a longer shape. I'm going to keep for the teardrops and the circles. And they're all going to pack into there. With these ones here, I've got just going to have some green in there as well. You can really go mad with the colours, because it is such a colourful piece. When people sort of talk about, shade and colour, using those sort of things, I always say that the best thing to do is to start with the kind of middle tones that you've got. So the medium green, orange, medium blue, that kind of thing, because that means that you've got somewhere to go darker and you've got somewhere to go lighter. So if you get your basic structure in basically in a mid-tone, then you can always make it darker and you can add some highlight colour in, or you can leave the paper as white highlights. If you go, when you're doing colour work, if you go straight in with your darkest colour, then you've kind of gone up to 11 or the top of the range before you know where to go, and it's kind of hard to bring it back from there if you need to. So if you just sort of start mapping out first of all in a mid-tone, and then if you need to get darker, you can. I mean, you can always reach for a black or something to make it really dark, but I tend to try and keep that to a minimum with using colour, because sometimes it works really well. But if you're trying to blend colours, I find that if you use too much black too quickly, then again it just gets very sort of dark and kind of very heavy without any subtlety. So I'm just swirling in some green spirals in there. So why I'm mentioning this is, again, we've got all this negative space to think about. So because I use my sort of palest green, I can go in and I can put, if I want to, I can put some green in between some of these little spaces now, just sort of like some of those negative spaces to kind of make the spiral kind of pop up a bit more like that. And then also I can decide which bits I want to bring out, which bits I don't. I can work on it a bit more gradually, and these gaps in between come a bit stronger. I can do a green gap going down into the orange if I want to. I'm not going to colour all of these in now because it's quite a detailed job, and I want to get on to kind of building the rest of him so that we've definitely got all the structure of him in by the end of the session, so that this is the kind of thing you can take off and spend a relaxing time doing. But if I just show, I've got the sort of green colour in there, which now looks quite dark, and then I'm going to go for my orange. Where's my orange hiding? That's it. I can take in some of these little corners now, going in between in the orange, and just sort of bringing those up, and that really starts to make them pop out a bit, and it just changes the feel of those shapes sort of blending together. And when you've got all these ones isolated, we can always go back and use some more different tones on these spirals to make them look, to give them a bit more surface and a bit more texture. And we'll look a little bit of that before we finish tonight. If I just want to put a little bit of that orange in to show you kind of, and then I can blend that down. So some of the orange is going to reach down into the red sort of spirals like that, and this is all going to get orange, and they're going to get a little bit of red in as well, so we can just see how that's looking. And then when you've done all that, you'll have these kind of white shapes against this coloured background, and then we can go back and working on those as well, so they're not just white shapes. We're not going to stop at just plain white shapes, not us, because we are doodlers. So I've got that bit in there. I'm just going to put a few more up underneath his jaw to kind of get that bit in there. So I'm hoping you're kind of seeing how by coming in and doing that negative space in between, that's starting to make these shapes sort of pop out quite a lot more and give them quite a lot of a bit more presence, so they're not too, gives them some strength and some boldness like that. So we can pop in between, and then we can go in and do even more detail. So I'm just adding some red around this sort of orange section, and if you put red in the orange section, it makes the orange section slightly darker. If you put green in, it makes it darker still. You can play with all the different sort of volumes you want to have in different areas. Right, so I really am going to move on now. Keep getting striped up. I wanted to colour all this in. So I'm going to do some green, just these last sort of green spirals in under his chin, and they're going to come up along under here. He's a very elegant beastie indeed. Do a nice row of snail spirals coming up under his chin, and I can fit some little circles in between. There we go. Right, so now we've got this sort of like frill that comes down with a real sort of like dragony kind of feel, hasn't it? It's got a real sort of fantastic sort of edge to it. So I'm going to choose a shape that's going to come down, I think, sort of like, I think we'll do it in sort of spirals. I think you want a darkish colour for here because it's kind of under his chin and it's got a bit more shadow going on. So I'm going to do like, I think these sort of spiral shapes sort of coming, maybe we'll just like sort of, just sort of do these sort of spiral. If you do like a curve first like that, and then another one kind of curving like this, and then as they come down, they're going to get a little bit smaller and kind of tuck down like that. And then we can go back and bring another line in up to meet those, and we're getting that kind of flame-like kind of feel coming down his sort of throat pouches. And again, I'm sort of simplifying him, so it's not like a completely, as I said, it's not meant to be a sort of nature study in that sort of way. So that's sort of giving me that kind of chin kind of feel there. Right, I'm just going to have a momentary juice break. So let me just mute quickly. There we go. Right, and then I think we're going to do kind of a little bit coming in here and then down here, and then we'll have a look at some of the patterns that we've got going on. So this area here is obviously kind of his ear, so that's going to be quite dark. So whatever we do in there has to be quite dark. And then I'm going to choose, so we'll come back to that. And then I've got this sort of red section up around his eye here. So I can see there's kind of like a big sweep of kind of coming behind this ear. So I'm going to just bring that down in a kind of area to define it, sort of like that line coming round there. That's sort of like the back of his head coming in there. And I'm going to do, again, one of our sort of grids, but I'm going to bring a line coming in, sort of taking that up to there, and then another one kind of coming in, so almost thinking of like a Y shape, kind of coming around like that, sort of moving around that way. And I can put another couple in here. And that's given us this sort of like Y formation sort of coming through on his back. And then I can bring some lines sort of going the other way. So again, just sort of coming through that shape round and just some lines curving down. And I'm going to leave those sort of like, so that gives me like a different kind of shape now to kind of fill in, because now I've got this sort of almost like pentagram sort of shapes, or what's not pentagram, I mean pentagram, I mean what's the 5 side? Pentagon, that's what I'm trying to say. He's not a pagan lizard. It might be, but I don't think he is. So I'm going to just divide that up again, and then I can draw in some, and it doesn't matter if this is kind of like, it doesn't have to be round. I'm just going to soften that down. So I'm softening the corners of that little cell into a soft scale like feel, just by drawing a sort of blob that fits into that shape there. And it's just sort of making that soft and moving it through. And again, I'm going to blend that in a bit with doing some blue, I think, in the negative spaces again to make it sort of shadowy. So I can just fill those in and just let those shapes just follow that little box that you've given yourself as a kind of guideline. So he really is a very elegant chameleon. And I like he's managed to have, on my one at least, he's got quite a nice imperious expression on his face. So last week we had owls that looked like they were sort of going who me, and this time we've got chameleons that are going sort of like next please move along. I'm sure he's quite well spoken chameleon. Right, so then looking at his sort of head shape around here, let's have a look at some of the scales that we've got up on his nose, because you've got those sort of big spirally things in. So how can we add to those now to kind of really get some detail going? So let me just move him down a little bit so I can let's get him a bit straight. Sorry, it looks slightly odd at this angle, but there we go. Right, so we've got these lovely swirls on his nose here, and I want to add some detail to these to kind of make them a bit, give them some more depth and things. So I'm going to break, let me see, I'm going to break this one up to make it more like a sort of comma shape. So that gives me this little sort of triangular window, and then I can put some blue circles into that just to kind of break it up again a bit smaller. And the same in this one here, I'm going to put a sort of sweeping line up into that curl, and then that gives me more little circles to fill in. And I can just pack them in quite tightly, and again that's sort of giving it a bit more surface and a bit more texture. And then in here I can get a few more, bring that edge up round there, and maybe I can do some lines coming up through that shape like a little sort of fan shape. That's quite nice. I quite like that. That's quite sweet. So let's do another one of those down here. So where I've got this big sort of fat comma, I can draw another line up, it's curling up to kind of meet that one there. And then I'm going to put a single circle into that sort of bottom section. Sorry if it's getting a bit wobbly. And bring those lines up through there and make those into sections. And I can almost make those into kind of petal sections. So again, to make that a bit more obvious, I can go back with a bit of a darker pen and just take out again those tiny little corners that come around there, and then that becomes like a petal. Soften that round, and that becomes like a little sort of half flower shape. Sorry, the focusing's annoying me on this. Let me just try and get that a bit better. I think that's a tiny bit sharper. And I can do a similar kind of thing on here. Those are my uprights going up, and then if I then just put like a U shape at the top of those, and that starts to become like little flowers kind of in there. And then around these circles too, I can just hunt those little bits of white negative space, almost like a little dot, and just sort of put them in. And there he goes. Right, I'm still not liking the focus on that. Sorry, camera. As I said, they're not designed for artwork. They're designed for, conferences with Strasbourg or something, which I imagine people, who have posh jobs do that sort of thing, don't they? There we go. Right, so I think that's a bit better. So under this circle here, I can put a little pouch of shadow just sort of under there, just to kind of make that sit up a bit. And I've got this sort of area here, so what we're going to do here, let's put another one of those flower shapes in, because I'm quite liking those. So again, I'm going to use my pale blue first to do a little circle to grow it out of like a flower head, and bring those petals sort of coming round like that, and then a circle to kind of fill that gap, and then some more petal shapes perhaps coming in there. There we go. So that's got those in, and then I can go back again with my darker pen and just make those a bit more obvious. Just looking for little tiny corners just to soften and just to make them into those kind of petal shapes and make them pop out a bit more. There we go. So then we've got this sort of end of his nose. Is like I've got a little end of nose there, so I'm going to just put some daisy bumps, like little petals, coming round like that, just to kind of make that a bit more obvious. And then there's a little hole there, so let's just fill that in. So I hope you can see that, you know, you sort of get these doodles in and then you think, oh, the outline's not quite right, but I can just fill in 1 or 2 little extra circles to kind of pad out any dips, and then suddenly you're kind of building the right shape for his face. And oh, sorry, I'm using the same pen, that's one, that's not changing. And then it just sort of helps to get the last little bits of his outline kind of correct, rather than trying to draw an outline to begin with. I'm on a quest to teach the world not to draw with outlines, but that's for another time. So yes, we can pull that line in. So we're starting to get quite a nice shape of his face. I think it'd be quite nice now to go and look at his eye and get some more work done on his eye, because that eyelid's looking a bit white, although it's quite white in the photo. I think I want to put a bit more colour on it. I think we should think about the sort of red section and those sort of nice purple bits as well. Is that? I think that's a better focus in there. Right, okay, so let's think about his eye. Right, so I'm going to take a few liberties with nature here. We're not going to have like a totally realistic kind of eye. So I'm going to start off with a yellow pen, so which I hope translates okay, because it's a bit, I don't know if I turn my light up a bit, it might be, so just going to turn my light up a little bit, see if it's too bright. No, I think that's not too bad, is it? Just make sure we can see what we're doing. So we're just going to put some nice fine rays, as it were, coming out from that eye, like spokes from a wheel, slightly closer together round the eye and then spreading out so they're slightly wider apart at the end, as it were. So we want to get some nice colour, and this is quite a good way of getting an eye to sort of blend in, to get the colours to work in an eye, because they are kind of, they're not flat colours at all, they have loads of little tiny segments in them. And then I'm going to go in and, well, because we've got that amber ring round, also orange ring round his eye, I'm then going to do half lines, so not all the way along, but just let them fade out. They're going in between each of those little yellow spokes, so just bringing them out from that orange circle that we drew round and fanning them round like that, so they're sort of like, it gives it much more of a kind of fireburst kind of feel. So the little half lines are not going all the way, we're leaving some of the white, and then we're going to go from the other side, little tiny short lines. I don't want these to meet up with the orange that I've gone on before. I want them to not meet up, would be the opposite, but still kind of in between, so it's just getting a bit more definition to that kind of outer line. So hopefully that's starting to really make his eye come alive a bit. Then this area underneath there, I've got the outline of my eye I've drawn in purple, so I want to put some purple, tiny purple patterns close along inside that eye, and then the purple line that I've got will kind of blend into these purple patterns. So you might, I'm going to do some of those daisy bump patterns kind of coming round, and then it really helps to define which part of him is eyeball and which part is eyelid. So I can bring those sort of smaller and smaller, tucking in underneath his eyeball like that, so it sort of just makes it that bit more interesting. And you could, if you totally go in and colour these now in different colours, so we could go in with a blue, the sort of pale blue colour, and just add like a little spot of blue. Like, I'm not colouring the wholes of these scales, I'm just doing the outer edge of them, and somehow that kind of again gives them a bit more of a kind of 3D effect, or makes it look like they're sort of changing direction. So they've just got like a little dot of blue in the colour and in the centre. And the same thing again if we look at this sort of blue section around here, instead of colouring each one sort of absolutely solidly in, we can put a dot of another colour into those outlines, and it kind of, you're leaving a little bit of white each time, kind of helps to stop that being too flat. You don't run the risk of then just sort of colouring it in and nothing much happening, you know, looking quite sort of dull. You can go in, and this way again you could get your metallic pens out, and you could do little dots of gold and all sorts of lovely metallics in amongst these sort of colours to really help them pop. Now I think we're going to do something with the eyelid because it just looks too white. And I know it's white on the photo, but you know, this is why we're obviously not trying to reproduce the photo. We've got to make the drawing work for the drawing. So I'm going to use a green colour. I want to use cool colours for this sort of close to the eye bit. So I'm going to use a pale green first of all. And I'm going to start, so the first line I'm going to do is, I suppose it's going to look like I'm drawing eyelashes on him, but I swear I'm not. I'm going to do an almost straight, but with a slight curve line through the middle. And then they're going to kind of radiate down. So as they go down towards the left of his eyelid, they're going to have more of a curve on them and get closer together. And as they come towards the right, they're going to have a right hand curve on them, and they're going to get closer together again like that. So that sort of starts to help. It's not just a pattern, it's also showing me the sort of shape of the eyelid that we've got going on there. And then I'm going to run a second line following the eyelid shape all the way down to the end each side like that, and then another one but slightly wider in the middle and then disappearing down. And again, we can leave that like a grid, or we can go in and we can then draw our circles into that again. So I think I'm going to do some pale blue just to add some more colours in. And I'm going to just go in and do teeny tiny weeny little circles, but following that grid shape again that we've given ourselves, so that when they go in and they soften those into scale shapes, they're changing size and dimension as the eyelid curves down and away. If you tried to draw the individual scales in, you know, trying to make sure that you were getting the perspective right on each individual scale, it can be very tricky because, you know, you can get lost as to where you are and, you know, end up doing them too big or too small. But this way, by doing this sort of little working out grid first time, and then you're just following your grid, you're not having to make difficult decisions, you're just trying to squish a circle into a tiny square, and what you can focus on is the squishing of the circle, and you haven't got to worry about whether your circle is the right size, because you know it is, because it's following the grid pattern that you've kind of worked out. And then when you've done all that squishing in, then his eyelid looks a lot more scaly, and it looks like a lot more doodly and a lot more chameleon-like. And then I'm just going to get my yellow pen, which has escaped me, so I had to pick it up, and again just put a little dot, and I'm going to leave a white outline around it, but just a little dot of yellow into those doodlies there, just to kind of brighten it up. And I think that's improved. I think that's, we come back a little bit and look, I think that's given the eye a lot more kind of power, makes it look a lot more bright and alive just by getting those sort of colours in. So we've got these sort of scale shapes going over this top section. I think it'd be quite nice to do something a bit more to those, because at the moment they're looking quite sort of, well, they're just looking like squares really. So I think we could do sort of, might run some, I don't know, I'm debating whether to run some stripes, or I think we might put some spirals into them. I think we're going to spiral them. So I'm going to use an orange because it's not as dark as the red, but it's in the same sort of tone. So I wonder if I can, so if you remember, we do the spirals, we sort of draw the kind of shape again, but we slightly sort of spiral it around each time. So yeah, I'm just going to sort of, because they're quite round, I'm just going to put like a spiral going into the middle of each square, I think. Yeah, I think that's working. It's bringing colour in, but it's not totally filling up the shape, and it's just giving it a bit more sort of strength and depth of tone, but it's not colouring it into a flat kind of bead. It's leaving a little bit of kind of white showing, gives it a bit more of something, you know, I think it stops it being too flat. And you can, of course, vary the colours of your spirals. So these ones in the middle and at the top where they're quite wide, we might want to keep them into orange because they're kind of a bit brighter. And then as we go into the smaller ones, we can do a darker colour spiral so they're not as bright, and that helps to improve the kind of shadowy feel. So I'm going to start off by doing the larger ones in lovely snail shell spirals, kind of coming round like that into the big ones, whizzing round these nice spiral shapes. Like that. And then where I've got the smaller ones, I'm going to swap to a red pen. Just put a couple more orange ones in, and that's going to hopefully have the effect again of adding a bit of tone and a kind of slightly darker effect onto those bits, which will just help to shadow round the eyelid. So let's get some nice spirals going in there. I think really you always start in the middle, don't you, and spiral out. I don't think you'd want to start at the edge and try and spiral in. I think that'd be quite hard. I think you'd sort of, you know, it's much easier to build on what's gone before than kind of try and hope that you hit the right note. And of course, when they're in the really elongated ones, they almost just look like you're breaking it up again. They're very long, thin spirals. There we go, let's pack those in. And so I think you can see that sort of go using the slightly darker tone closer to the eye, that is going to look a lot like shadow. And again, we're starting to get a really nice sort of complicated, complex, involved surface, and we've still really been building it up from very simple shapes, just taking a little bit at a time and working back into it. And then down here, I think I'm just going to put some spots in because the scales are so tiny that I'm not going to get a lot of spiral detail and get a little bit in. Now I think that this row now of purple shapes that are underneath, the sort of bigger, the bigger scales, I think they are crying out for some daisy flowers. I don't know about you, but I think I want to get something a bit more florally going into him along here. I think that would look really sweet. So I've got a nice shape here, so I'm going to put a centre into for my daisy flower, and then round come my daisy bumps. Just, you know, it's a classic, isn't it, the daisy? It's a lovely shape to draw, and it always works. So now he's got a sort of, you know, a daisy chain, which kind of like links to some of the shapes that we're doing up in this section. So I think it works really well. You can't beat the classics, can you? A lovely daisy chain. Like that, coming round. And again, we can go back and draw in the negative spaces and make those petals pop out a bit more, but I think I will do it not in a purple. I think I'll do it in a slightly brighter colour. But let's draw some daisies in. Let's draw to daisies on our chameleon, which is not a phrase you would have thought you were going to hear tonight, really. But we're going to draw daisies on our chameleon. Round he goes. There we go. Just filling in all those nice daisy bumps. And daisies, and again, because we've already mapped out our circles, we've already got a guide really of how we're going to fit them in, so we don't have to worry about making them shrink and getting them the right size, because we're just putting in our circle and then following round with our daisy bumps. There we go. So that's a row of purple daisies just going through, making him look very elegant and quite pretty. So he's changing his mood now. He's slightly more like he's slightly annoyed because his girlfriend's making him wear some flowers. Right, so I don't know where I'm getting this story from. It's just developing in my head. So let's have a think about these ones sort of along here. I think we could put some, I think, you know, this is, again, I'm quite tempted to put more daisies in, but I think we need to have something in these So I'm thinking maybe some fan shapes into these upper the sort of scales on the upper lip that he's got here. So I'm going to start in the pale green, because again, if you're not sure, start in the paler colour, and you can always go over the top and make it a bit stronger. So I'm going to put a little sort of half moon shape inside that scale, and then rays like sun rays coming out again from that central point. So we'll do all these in, and then we'll have a look. We might do some more. Well, I mean, we might do something extra is what I mean, really. And then, so all the rays go in like little sunbursts. So just central little sort of half moon first. That's it, going round, and then, and again, if you do the half moons the same sort of size, then as the rays come out, they'll naturally fill up the space that you've got, and you'll get a sense of unity through those sort of shapes coming round. And here we go into that one. I think I'm going to put one last on this end here, and then we'll come back. I missed two at the bottom here, so let's do these two at the bottom here. And this last one on the end here. Right, so there we've got these nice sort of half moon, slightly 1920s patterns, maybe sort of seashell patterns. But I think we want to put something in the middle of those little half moon shapes that we've left ourselves. So I'm thinking at least colour them in so they become little yellow centres. So that again helps to define his mouth section. So we can see where that's going all the way along. There we go. So that's sort of got some nice yellow sections in there. So then we've got the underneath bit. I think I want to do a different pattern. I don't want to do anything exactly the same because it'll blend in too much. And I definitely want to use a darker colour because it's kind of the underneath jaw of his mouth, isn't it? So I want to make sure it's got a slightly shadowed feel. So I think I'm going to do some rainbow shapes, sort of coming under like that. Just some shapes to reflect their main shape that they're hiding under. And then I think I can add a little bit of dark into where those little negative shapes are around those curlicues. I can just put a little bit of blue into that as well to define them, firm them up a bit. There we go, just sort of, so they've got that nice sort of whirly feel. And you can always make them go slightly off centre as well, which works quite nicely. So you can do a small one slightly off to one centre and then slightly stretch it on one side so they all disappear in more in one side and then they're more open on the other side. I think that works quite nicely. Or we should have done that further on. I like that more than the ones I've done down here. So let's put another small shape in there, and I can just sneakily kind of edit that down a bit. And then again over here I'm going to put my central bit off centre, and so that they go round and kind of disappear, tuck away, tuck under, like that, sort of through. And then I'll put another, and we'll keep working like that on, and I'm liking that pattern. That's another one to go in the pattern memory bank, I think. Like that. Yeah, so nice one. I think it's almost got a feeling a bit like when you do swirls of buttercream icing. You know, they're sort of like rosettes of icing going on the side of a cake, which I don't want to think about too much because I'll start craving cake. There we go. Right, so then we've got that nice sort of rhythmic feel, and again let's move back and see how we're doing, how we're getting all the bits in. There's some areas around here that I think we need to sort of think about, but before we get to those, let's have a think about his sort of dragon frill under here. Again, I think I'm going to go for, I want a darkish colour. I'm going to go for, I think we'll start with the purple, and thinking about it, I want to bring some sort of waves kind of coming through. So I'm going to go sort of through the middle of each one of these first of all and kind of curl a line going up and along, and we can get plenty of curl into those shapes kind of coming through. Like that. So I've got this sort of spiral coming in. And then I'm going to do the same colour, so a purple double line either side. But I'm going to change colours in a minute. So I'm going to do, and the line's going to disappear off into the point of his frill, so that each frill point, as it were, I suppose one would say frill point, is getting a bit deeper and a bit darker each time we bring those lines round. And bring those through. And again, as you see, as you get these lines drawing closer together, it sort of, it's that old thing that I relentlessly say, but as the lines come close together, it kind of gives them more depth, and I like that sort of feel. And then I'm going to go, because that was purple, so I'm going to go for, I don't know what to go, I think I'll go into red. So I'm going to do red next. I'm going to do a couple of red lines, because we're sort of going through the rainbow, sort of rainbow colours, aren't we? Because if you know, red and blue is purple, so next to, if you go purple, you can go red, and then at the red I'm going to go orange afterwards, so we're going to get like a slight rainbow kind of colour. And again, it's a really simple line, but just changing those colours hopefully will give it quite a nice ripply kind of feel for our rainbow chameleon. And just bring those two in and round there. And bring, so we've got two red lines, and then we're going to go into orange next, like that. And then, so I've done the red, so now I'm going to go into orange, and see, hopefully getting a lovely kind of feel. The points are getting nice and dark on each time, which is making them nice and strong. So, and I'm hoping that also having the colours gradiating from the darker to the lighter kind of means that the middle of the frill starts to look like it sort of has a bit more movement to it, like it's sort of wiggling up and moving around. So I'm just bringing orange lines now, kind of through here. And then the last bit, of course, is going to be yellow. And I think that's just given that really nice strong colour, and it's still got that nice sort of disappearing into the point feel, but it's also got a bit of depth going this way as well. And if you want to get really detailed, you could go along each of these lines and do some chevrons in the colour to kind of enhance that whole kind of effect. And now I've said that, I'm going to have to try and do that on at least one part, aren't I, to see what it looks like. I hadn't thought about that until now, but let's give it a go and see what that looks like. Chevrons or circle, let's do chevrons. So again, if I do some diagonal chevrons and they disappear up into the point, and same on this, they're kind of coming up to meet them, so that, you've got a left-leaning chevron and a right-leaning chevron. Oh, that does look quite nice, doesn't it? And you think, oh, no, that's a good idea. Oh, I'll have to do it now. And all of them. Oh, my goodness. Well, such the way to hell is paved with good ideas. There we go. So let's put some more chevrons. I think I'm going to keep them kind of like going the same direction, and they're going to swap over kind of in the middle, if that makes sense. So like that. And then I can put an orange one in. So again, going in that sort of direction, and that up in there. There might have to be an extra orange, I think, to make this work. There we go. And then the last bit is going to be in yellow. Oh, that does look effective, doesn't it? I'm rats, we're going to have to do that on all of them now. But, it's worth it. It's worth it. It's going to be really effective, I think, when it's done. There's no point doing a half a job, is there, when you can do, a full job. I won't do all of it now. I might come back to a little bit because I'm really liking the effect, but I might just do one more bit because I really want to see how it pans out. You see, I do have a plan when I start these classes. Do trust me, I do have a plan, and I have fairly extensive notes, and 9 times out of 10 I then make all these notes and things and then completely ignore what I've initially planned to do, and something else happens during the class. So that's just the way of things, I guess. But I like to feel that I've planned, but then I guess if you've planned, you can also choose to completely ignore your plan and go a bit off plan as well. So let's put the red ones there and up there and bring those sort of through, and then we're going to go into orange. And I think this is working because it does have that sort of scale-like feel. It's a different sort of scale, so it's a different mark. It's making it clear that this is the frill of the lizard, and not the same as the body of the lizard, but it's also still referencing those kind of scale shapes. So I think that's why I'm pleased with it, and I hope it's working for you too. And you're not cursing me for making you do such tiny little drawings. But I think overall that's going to be really effective, and we're getting that really nice shading effect because the chevrons disappearing into that sort of point is sort of helping make that work. Right, so now we could, of course, if we had a bit more time, continue down and kind of, you can see if you were looking at the sort of leg section that you've got going in here, you can sort of start to see where you could map out like a grid sort of turning round this corner and kind of coming down in these all kind of ways. But I don't know that we're going to have time to do that actually in this session now. So let's have a look about this one here. That's got to have a great big thing going on. It hasn't got to have, let's put a great big daisy on it, I think. Let's not get too serious and too scaly. So I'm going to put a great big circle, well, relatively speaking, in orange, and then I want to give that a sort of curve. So I'm going to imagine that my daisy petals are slightly curving away and down. And I do like sort of north, south, east, west first, though it's not totally accurate, and sort of put those in between. And then I can go round and fill in between, and then I think you get, I don't know, I think it works. Sometimes I think it works better, sometimes it doesn't. It's funny how it changes, but that's what I've done this time. But I think it sort of helps because you can kind of like overlap all those petals in, and you can always sort of squeeze in a few extra ones because they are sort of overlapping. And then if you get holes, we can always put circles into those holes and where they come. Like that. Sort of in that sort of way round there. And then again, if I come back in with my red pen, I can come in round those sort of daisy bump top edges and just blend that in a little bit. Although it is quite a sort of strong shape, there is quite a definite circle. So to keep that sort of circle not getting too lost, I'm going to then put some purple and blue, I think, round it to, again, you can just build some daisy bumps off around that, but just having that darker colour helps to isolate that section. And just sort of move it round just so that circle becomes quite obvious. So you can see how we've got our spirals in this sort of section here. So I've got some green spirals in there, so I'm going to come in between them with the orange because that's going to help sort of blend away that grid section a bit, and just bring those down like that into there. And that's starting to eat away the grid and make those circles pop out a bit more, and the sort of spiral shapes sort of in between. And it's quite nice having that green contrast with them. It's really lively because, of course, green and orange are opposites, aren't they? And it always confuses me because I think of them as opposite colours, and then the technical, the posh word, or it's particularly posh, but the official word is complementary. And somehow I feel that doesn't feel like the word opposite, and I wouldn't say that they complement each other in the way that you would say, the curtains complement the carpet in this room. You'd say complement sounds like quite a quiet sort of word, whereas, you know, the whole point about the complementary colours is that they make each other sing, that they're very vibrant. So I sort of feel that never quite sits right with me that that's the word that we use, but, you know, that who am I to argue? She said, having just argued. So I can just start getting some more of this background in, and then that starts helping to make these shapes really sort of pop up and look a lot sort of stronger. And then I think we've got to blend this up into here, haven't we? Because we've sort of got this sort of space that's kind of materialised in the middle of him. So I want to sort of, I'm going to go switch into, I think blue in amongst. So as they come up here, I'm going to do some blue in around here and blend those in with blue so that they're going towards the cooler colours that we've got happening around the face and the eye, and those sort of spirals kind of coming around there, and then a little bit of space there, so let's do a spiral kind of into there, and then I'm just going to put some circles in there for the moment, and we'll always come back and think about how we can add to those, but just to sort of blend and bring those sections together so we're not getting a sort of unthought about space, that we have definitely thought about them. And I can bring some more blue into that, pale blue into that eye section around about there, and take us in there. Now I've got these nice, so we did these nice spirals, didn't we, here, these sort of slightly off-centre ones, or sort of rainbows. So I'm going to now put a blue stripe in amongst that purple, following the original lines that we've drawn, I think. And this is, again, I think it's a really nice way of getting a very dense colour, but without literally colouring in. It's just running lines that do the same kind of thing, kind of pulling them through. Now, thinking about all these spirals that we've got against these backgrounds, I think we could do a bit more on them in the last few minutes to kind of see how we can make those, again, more colour on them, but not just colouring them in a flat shape. So just do that last one under his chin there. Then if we look back at this sort of section here, so we've got an orange background, so let's take, again, because we're going for quite a full colour, so let's take the pale kind of green colour on here, and I'm just going to put a few little describing lines, like little curved lines coming up and round those, just sort of under there, and just around some of the edges, and that's also going to help them pop out against this sort of orange background. But I'm not trying to colour in every little inch, I'm just imagining that I'm putting in a little bit of shadow. So like underneath the bottom of a circle, just a few little rays of colour in there, just to make that like a little bit of shadow. And I hope you're seeing that. I'm hoping that's sort of giving that like quite a sort of strong, it's giving a little bit of shape, and of course because it's working against that orange background, it's helping to get some more definition on and some more life into these shapes. Again, they're not just flat white spirals. So like where this one is coming round here, you can sort of bring some little rays out and around, just sort of flicking them round, and maybe underneath that bottom edge, and a little bit of shadow under the circles, and just sort of in and around, just where the overlap comes really. Again, you don't have to do all of it, you can leave a little bit of white each time because that helps to kind of give it a highlight, but just think about adding a little moment of shadow, and by using the sort of cool colours with this orange background, it really helps to make it sort of sing out, and you can kind of see what's going on a lot more. And it's not colouring it in just like a flat, you know, colouring bit. It's doing something extra. It's just giving that a little bit of surface and texture, as well as just putting some colour on it, and that little bit of white, and it helps you to kind of blend colours in. And then once you've got sort of like, again, I've got like a green mid-tone on there. Again, if you remember what I said, if you then go back and use my dark green, if I want to exaggerate any bits, like I can just dot in Just doing some dots along that orange line, and look how that's just a tiny extra bit of shadow, but it's just helping that shape to stick, to sort of pop and look really three-dimensional. Just sort of bring a little flick of colour. And that just a little bit of shadow on, and see that's hopefully making that look really, let's bring that camera a little bit and bring it up so you can see it. It's not so fuzzy. This is definitely one you're going to want me to scan and send through, because I hope you can see just a little bit of extra kind of dark green coming in, that sort of making those shapes get really, really 3D and just exaggerating them a bit. But if you put the mid-tone in first, then you know that you want to keep most of that in place, and it just acts as a really good guide as to where you want your darker shadow. So if you did it all in the dark colour first, you'd find you could easily kind of, you know, over-egg it and put too much in, and then you can't go back from that. There's no way back from that. Sounds very dramatic, but this way you can kind of add in these little extra moments as you go. And I am going over that orange outline now, but I know I want to now. You know, I haven't, if I'd done it all in the dark green, and then if I change mine, it'd be really hard to change. But hopefully that's, you can see that's really helping these shapes to kind of pop out. Let's turn my light up a little bit. Come on, light, respond to me. That's better. I don't know if that's helping just to show it through, but yeah. And then so you can work your way through, and even as you've got on these sort of again, sort of coming down here, I can still put some, again, so I put all the places you think you might have shadow, put them in with the paler green, and then just go back with a little bit of dark green just to sort of bring those up. And it still works in the section where you've got the red background, because you can use it in just the same sort of way. So I'm just slightly speeding up just to get some more of this in. Not being quite as precise, but I just want to try and get the overall effect before we run out of time. Time's winged chariot and all that bit is doing its thing, so I just want to get a bit more of that in. So I'm hoping this is really starting to show you how these shapes, you know, started off very simply on this sort of grid pattern to help give us a guideline to get them in, and then we've now sort of really got rid of that grid line with the background, and now they've become sort of like ornamental shapes with lots of shadow. You see, if you want to get in a line of dark in, but you don't want to be too dark, again, you can just sort of dot, like put a line of dots first, and if you're happy with it, you can then put some other shapes in just to extend it. You don't have to go straight in with a line, you know, you can dot it round, and then just a little flicky light lines, so you're not being too hard with it. Like that, and we just get that last one in, so, well, not the last one, but one in round there. And you can keep on building up little areas of darkness to make that stronger and stronger. And again, if you want to then even put some shading in on the background in the sort of orange bits, you can come in. Oops, I'm dropping pens on the floor left, right and centre. I do hope that wasn't the one I wanted. So where you've got the orange, you can add some extra red just coming underneath. So they're sort of, that's sort of where some extra shadow is on the background, because these shapes are casting a little bit of shadow on the background too. And that starts to, again, really help make them stand out and make them look. So it's gone from being, you know, based on a kind of natural-ish image to being quite patterny, and then it's getting to sort of like making the patterns their own sort of sense of reality, if that doesn't sound too arty. Just sort of make sure you're happy with your background and well. So I've got all this to do in here as well, so there's loads to do to get that in. Let's just look at this big one here, because this is quite a nice big shape, so I can hopefully, no, that's me dark green. I want to do, so yeah, mid-tone first, paler green first, come up under its sort of nose like that, and then a bit up on this side. Just a few, and if you keep using lines, you can always do more lines. And again, just like when we're doing monochrome and we want to get more shade, we just do a few lines first and then put some more lines and some more lines, and that's a way of building up and blending those colours without going in straight. Because the trouble is, if you go in just sort of straight and just colour in like a block of colour, then you've got to think about, how do I get the edge? You know, it gives you a very strong edge to work with, and you've got to think, well, then it tends to look a bit stripy more than kind of blended. So again, I can just, where I've got that shadow, look, I'm just putting a little row of dots following that kind of line, and I can join the dots up and bring those sort of round. There we go. I'm just putting in that little bit of shadow. You can tell I'm concentrating because I've gone all quiet suddenly. But I'm just going to keep, and I think, although it's like, you know, it seems like initially a very simple pattern, it seemed like there wasn't a lot going on, but now you can see it's actually loads to get in and to get this really sort of intense detail going. So we're going to have to, I'm going to have to pull it away, and we're going to have to draw things to a close, but I hope you can see how there's plenty of mileage to keep going with this and getting all these lovely three-dimensional shapes. Let's pull back and have a good look at where we are now. So he's suddenly got all these strange patterns on him, and he's become a very elegant portrait of a chameleon, which sounds like, and then I think I'd probably put something darker in this area as well, and then maybe just take a little bit further down. And I think again up here I can do this same effect we've got here, but in shades of blue to give this area a bit more three-dimensionality. And there we go. So portrait of a very colourful chameleon.